For me, a nourished community looks like folks being sustained on a variety of levels, being like satisfied on a variety of levels, being able to experience pleasure with their food. I think that's what like is really nourishing, and even in my work, but also in my trying to develop that for myself. It's so that I can share that with community, is being able to figure out what like nourishes my mind, what nourishes my energy. And I think in a community that looks like that, where everyone's feeling nourished, feeling like filled up, feeling like rested, like really truly rested on a variety of levels, is what a nourished community looks like to me. I think even feeling connected is something that's really nourishing. Feeling seen and feeling heard is a very nourishing experience. And I think when community is embodying those things, like people are really feeling fed, that's a really beautiful thing. And food is a good starting point for that. And then building on that is kind of like a nice gateway to build and connect with folks and really like fill all of those kind of more unseen ways of being nourished. Hello, my name is Maya, and we're here at East New York Farms, where Deep Roots has a couple of beds where we're growing plants and greens and other vegetables here that go towards the Soul of Food workshop series. Deep Roots is an Afro-Indigenous centered educational project that seeks to uplift the stories of Afro-Indigenous foodways through like workshops, classes, media, events, and curriculum development that is through and by the voices of people who we're targeting it for. It's for Black and brown folks. We want it to be written by Black and brown folks. The ethos or the mission of Deep Roots is being able to create these things and also being able to include folks that look like myself and my peers, and being able to get compensated and paid for that work as well, which is, you know, can be one of the more challenging parts, especially when it comes to working in sectors that are often undervalued, and particularly in the States, being at the intersection of education and farming and food. It's kind of like you're picking the most marginalized careers. So it's just really being grounded in a purpose is what drives me in this work and what has driven me in wanting to build something like Deep Roots. So the Soul of Food came about in 2020. I've been working with, I had pitched it to Green Thumb in 2019, wanting to create a class where we would be preparing dishes that are centered around African diaspora, but particularly around a lot of the Black historical figures that have been informing my food politic and understanding, and my own kind of personal journeys and stories with another project called Seeds and Receipts. And I wanted to like build on that while also creating an offering for a community to be a part of that has like cooking. We're doing like hands-on cooking together. Where, you know, we originally were gonna be partnered with a site that had a backyard where we'd be able to get fresh ingredients. So it was meant to be like a very like holistic seed to plate type of interactive hands-on workshop for folks that is free of cost, supplemented, subsidized, paid for by the city, because, you know, folks want to have access to these things, different levels, socioeconomic levels. And so we started working on that in 2019, and you know, we all know what happened in 2020 when we were just about to do that pilot, and a lot of things were getting cut, but we managed to pivot very quickly, as a lot of folks did in March of 2020, to turn the class virtual. So from there, we shifted to turning it virtual, despite me being a much more like in-person facilitator, which was quite a shift. And so we did that. So the first year, Soul of Food was kind of in a different iteration than we originally had envisioned. It was Zoom of 2020, but to the best of our ability, and being able to actually, we put together like these kits, these cooking kits to send to participants. And if they were local, have them pick up so that they could kind of get something closer to what we wanted. So that was like the first year of Soul of Food. And it focused on like figures like Fannie Lou Hamer, Grow to Make, Grow Up Nurse Smart. And then since then have like tried to expand on the series offering. So, in 2021, we were able to offer another virtual session. 2022 was the first year that we actually got to do in-person programming because we got the funding back to be able to do in-person, as well as like figuring out different protocols so folks feel safe. And we're expanding it to like the African diaspora, like from my experience, my lived experience, talking about like Southern food, Southern cuisine, branching off into having a session that focused on like Jamaican foodways and Jamaican cuisine for Jamaican Independence Day, and then focusing on other parts of the plant. So yeah, it's kind of evolved and tried to like expand and build on it each year to really create an experience where folks get to cook with the ingredients, see where the ingredients are grown. Because another thing about the series, now that we're able to do it in person, has been at different garden sites throughout the city, different growing spaces. And that's been really fun to do and have and be able to like show appreciation for a lot of the elders, as well as newer growers that are leading different garden spaces, getting to share their space and have folks be in a classroom setting that is like warm and welcoming. And it's like, you're not just in like a closed room. You're like, oh, like we're in a little oasis. We're gonna be a little oasis while we're cooking together today. And yeah, each of the sessions, people get to, it's like a collective cooking. We'll do like some grounding and contextualizing of the topic or the theme that each session is having, talking about the ingredients, the people, some of the histories and origins of things, and then going into demonstrating different like knife skills. So some folks will come in, they like really are in the kitchen. Other folks maybe aren't as familiar. So being able to have a space where everyone can kind of get their different needs met and are welcome. And it's like, hey, like wherever you're at, we're here with you, and we're like sharing space and taking care of each other is really kind of the tone that I try to set for the sessions. And then folks get to cooking together. We like break up into different stations. Then we bring everything together to prepare it based on what we're making, and then we eat with each other. And then folks get to like take home recipes and things of that sort. And it's just really nice. I think it's been a really, really lovely space to facilitate and share with folks, especially when people have like experiences where they're like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know we could do this. Or like, yeah, I usually don't like collard greens, but these were pretty good. Or, oh my gosh, I've never thought of using the stems of a leafy green in the beginning of a recipe. Like I usually just throw it away or compost it, as well as people getting to check out some of the books that I usually bring. So I often encourage folks, like I have my knowledge and my experiences and my own biases, but I try to bring other materials so that folks can go deeper than what I'm able to share. Over here, we have two different types of collard greens. So collard greens are really relevant to my heritage's foodways, particularly of the Southern United States. And, from my family being from Mississippi, North Carolina, as well as like the DMV, Virginia, Maryland area. So I grew up eating collards. I love sharing collards with folks, especially in classes where sometimes we'll cook them, sometimes we'll have them in raw preparations to like share the traditional ways of eating them, as well as like you can eat this in other ways. It doesn't have to be cooking for 2 or 3 hours. That's great. I love that too, but also trying to get folks excited about plants and seeing my excitement to maybe encourage them to see excitement in the things that they grew up with, or, no matter what that is. I think sometimes folks kind of undervalue their food experiences, whether they're great or maybe not so great, but just kind of, honoring what nourished you growing up. So that's something that I try to demonstrate through my own experiences as well. So we're here at one of the Deep Roots garden beds that are growing here at East New York Farms. And we're kind of at that point in the season where things are starting to wind down, and what we call senesce, which is when they're like kind of dying down or finishing. And we have a couple of really cool crops that we've been growing throughout this season that are relevant to Afro-Indigenous foodways. And something that's been really exciting to grow that we have here is our rice. So we're growing rice, and I think sometimes folks might think of rice as more like flooded patties, but this particular variety is an upland variety of rice. So I think most folks think of lowland growing rice, which grows in the water. Upland growing rice, it's rice that can grow just in like regular soil without having the flooding. So we've been growing that. This is my first year growing rice. I've grown like a couple of other grains, but rice is kind of new. And this one is really relevant because if you know the histories of the African diaspora, particularly those from West Africa, have like a long legacy of rice growing expertise and technologies, and really wanting to tap into that as well as be able to show folks in the community who come to our workshops like what's possible and what we can do even in a small space. So we're over here at the other half of the bed that has the sorghum. And sorghum is a really amazing plant. It's really cool. It thrives in like drought tolerant conditions, salt, poor soil that's just having a hard time. It'll really grow anywhere. So it's one of those plants that are starting to kind of get recognition by folks who are trying to encourage the growth of like climate resilient plants, and sorghum is one of those. But it's been grown for thousands of years by folks from Africa, particularly like West, East Africa, as well as throughout Asia, a couple of different Asian countries and regions, specifically I think like India, and then also coming here to the States. So thinking about the South and the Appalachian region of the United States, sorghum has been a plant that's been really important for the stalks. So the stalks, some varieties contain a juice that can get cooked down into a syrup, and then can also be cooked into like a sugar granules, but more often than not for the syrup. So this type of sorghum is red sugar drip, which is specifically grown, as its name suggests, for the syrup that it produces. And it also has grain head that is red in color. And with the sorghum in particular, this year we piloted Black and Indigenous centered course called Flower Play, and wanting to be able to like bring more plants like this for folks to see, as well as learning about alternative grains and flours that can be used in baking. And yeah, I was trying to mention a little earlier about some of the traditional uses of plants like sorghum being for breads and doughs, for beers, like fermenting it, things like that. So it has a lot of purposes and uses. In the South, when it comes to other types of grains or plants, which I'm sure maybe sorghum is one of those, as well as like rice and other things that have been grown, is like using the whole plant. If you're not using the stalks for the sugar, you're using it for like either like making bedding or for giving to the animals to eat, but finding a way to really honor all of the work that you put into growing it, and that being a very like African diaspora as well as indigenous practice of like having a relationship with the plants, and also trying to like make not as much use, but trying to help it, give back what you don't use back to the earth and be able to share it with other beings, Even with like me growing the sorghum, folks were often asked like, how are you gonna protect the birds from getting the sorghum that are gonna eat it? And I'm like, it is somewhat of a concern, but I think because we grow so much, birds and animals can be a little greedy sometimes, but I also don't want them to feel like, oh, we can't share with other creatures in the ecosystem. And also, since we're going on a smaller scale for educational purposes and we don't have the produce kind of over our heads, we can kind of have a little more relaxation. I think maybe if we were production scale or production farm, we might be like, oh, okay, we gotta get some netting around it. But even still, I tended to kind of shift my farming philosophy to growing enough that other beings in the ecosystem can have some too. And if it gets out of hand, then taking some integrated pest management practices, but trying not to see the surrounding creatures as like the enemy and trying to figure out how to work with them and balancing that, which, it's tricky, and it depends on where your scenario and your context that you're working in. Because yeah, sometimes like humans, animals do a little much. When it comes to grains or starches or really like energy rich crops, I think most folks might be a little intimidated to grow it, especially if you don't have a lot of space. You want to grow quick growing things or things that you can harvest throughout the season. So just trying to figure out like what's feasible on a small scale and how to carry that knowledge and what I learned to other folks who want to try it out or do it because yeah, most folks might not be able to grow their own rice, but maybe if they have an understanding, even just having an understanding of how it's done might have a greater appreciation. Something I'm hoping that folks will unlearn by coming to workshops like the Soul of Food is that a learning environment can be fun. It doesn't have to be like competitive or intense. It's like you can learn in a space where you don't feel like you're trying to reach like a particular goal. The only goal that I really have in mind is that folks feel seen and feel welcome and feel nourished and feel like, oh, okay, like I learned something new today, or I feel like there's new possibilities for myself and whatever that means for them. I want folks to just have deeper relationships with their food, and that's been important in my journey, as well as just feeling like, oh, like I can do this. I can grow this maybe, or even if something is new to you, just being able to feel the possibility, being able to feel like, oh, like let me try this out. And maybe it won't work out. Maybe this, I'm trying to grow sunflowers in a shady part of my backyard. Maybe it doesn't go so well, but at least I get the experience of trying it out. I want folks to kind of tap in and like tap into their curiosity and to get a little more curious. There's only so much we can do in 2.5 hours, even though that seems like a lot of time. There's only so much we can do in 2.5 hours, and I want folks to take away a curiosity of like, oh, how could I continue this? Maybe what came up and do I want to like learn more about? Maybe, how can I get more involved in like projects or movements that are like this, that are like Deep Roots, that are like things that even precede Deep Roots that folks have been working on for like decades and stuff that has influenced my work. And to get folks asking questions, I think is one of the major things. Asking questions, because I think when folks start asking questions, that is a gateway to like making a lot of discoveries about your surroundings as well as yourself. And that can be really enriching for your spirit, I think, especially with all of the challenging things that are happening in the world, in our lives, locally, whatever. And sometimes I think on social media, there can be a lot of like comparison and not a lot of space for like self-reflection and like what you actually want out of life and what you want to offer to life and community. And I think a first step to that is like building a relationship with yourself and figuring out what your relationship is to other things and other people.